Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Building a Black Educator Pipeline podcast. I am your host, educator activist Shayna Terrell, dedicated my life to the lifelong struggle of freedom and liberation for my people. Welcome to all my co-conspirators out here watching the show. We appreciate you guys. And of course, if we have some newcomers that are in the mix today, we love and appreciate your support too. At the top of today's show, I just want to send a major shout out, a lot of light and love to all of our folks out there who have been affected and devastated by Hurricane Ida. Um, I know that there's a lot of devastation across the nation today happening. So again, I just want to send light and love to folks out there. I know many of you like me have never seen probably a storm of this magnitude really hit your area. So the flooding, the hurricanes, and tornadoes, I know it's been a lot. So again, shout out to everybody that's been devastated by that. I'm sending you much light and much love through that storm today. But let's get into it. So first of all, I want to always shout out Citizens Ed and the Center for giving us this platform to talk to real people in the real struggle doing the real work. So today's theme, Black male educator voices, retaining and sustaining Black male educators in the pipeline. With our amazing guest today, I want us to explore Black male educators' impacts on our community and how can we retain, sustain, and recruit Black male educators through liberatory practices. So let's welcome our guests. So Cornell Ellis is a native of Kansas City and a product of a diverse Kansas City public and private education. After graduating from Rockhurst High School, he played football at the University of Missouri at Columbia for 2 seasons. While in college, Cornell began his passion for education and justice. He became the director at Boys and Girls Club Teen Center in Columbia, Missouri, while also managing curriculum for trauma-informed English language arts practices at Roosevelt University in Chicago, Illinois. Cornell received his Bachelor of Arts in History from Avila University with the specialization in Ancient World Studies. After graduating, Cornell taught, managed, instructionally coached, and worked in administrative duties for 8 years. Through his teaching success, he was able to participate in and lead advanced professional development opportunities like National Academy for Advanced Teacher Education and Better Lessons Master Teachers Program. Through Cornell's passion and vision, he helped found Amplify Teachers of Color Conference and Brothers Liberating Our Communities, also known as BLOC, which both exist to sustain and increase teachers of colors in education. Cornell uses his educational and professional experience to provide a strong understanding of equitable and justice-centered surrounding for schools leaders through public speaking and consultation with his LLC, Eggshells Incorporated. It has been Cornell's goal in his career to create safe spaces for difficult conversations around race and equity. By curating liberatory curricula, creating anti-racist professional development, and providing school systems with supplement tools for teacher evaluation, Cornell aims to make schools places where all teachers can thrive and all students can achieve. So please welcome to the show our guest, Mr. Cornell Ellis. Welcome, brother.
What's going on, sis? How are you?
I'm good. Listen, you are here doing the good work, okay?
Oh man, some days it feel good, other days it just feel long.
Yo, it's a lifelong fight. Like it's a lifelong.
That's what you said. Yeah, that resonated with me when you said that lifelong fight. I'm like, I start looking out the window, like, man.
Yeah, it's lifelong. It's lifelong. We in this. We dedicated to this. We new to this. We ain't new to this. We true to this.
That's a fact. That's a fact.
But welcome, brother. We are so happy to have you here today. And I want to shout out Cornell, everybody, because he is actually in the field teaching. So this brother set up his sub plans, as some of you are familiar with, to come out here and join us today on Building a Black Educator Pipeline. But welcome, brother.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm happy to be here. You all, I cite often as y'all in Philadelphia as like the inspiration and really the light behind Block. And really the Sharif is being kind of the light behind my work and a great mentor, and you being a great friend. So I really appreciate the opportunity to be on and share a little bit of my insight with y'all.
Dope, Cornell. The block is hot. The block
The
is hot.
block stay hot, fool.
Listen, we ready for you. So I always start out by asking folks who join us, because I think it's so important, to please share with us your educational journey. What inspired you to become an educator?
Yeah. I really think, my journey, as y'all heard in my bio, my journey started early. It actually started even before that, in college. When I was in high school at Rockhurst, it was a private school, and it's a private, pretty affluent. If those of you that are from Kansas City know about Rockhurst. So for our senior year, we had to go to a senior service project. And it was my choice actually to go to an urban school here in town in Kansas City. And I was a teacher assistant. I kind of helped with her lesson plans and help grade papers and help out with their fifth and third grade classroom as early as like 17 years old. And I still keep in touch with one of those kids from the class. Like one of them is still a really good friend of mine. And that was like 15 years ago now. So that's really kind of like where I would say, my actual work started, kind of like the catalyst. My mother is also an educator. My dad was not formally an educator, but he's one of the best teachers I've ever had in my life. My sister is in education. So I kind of come from a line of educators. I come from a household where education was important and it was lauded as something that's not necessarily a privilege, but like a right? It's something that you can't get by without, you know what I'm saying? It wasn't even like mandatory. It was just a given, right? And so I'm privileged in that sense to come from a space and to come from a place with family and to come from people that care about me that always push me to be the guy that I am now, and to continue pushing the next generation to be the best that they can be as well, right? I think that's truly what it means to be an educator, is to plant the seeds so that those that come after you can enjoy the shade, right?
Yeah.
We know that, we're not here for very long. And as educators, we pour ourselves into these kids and we pour ourselves into these communities so that the world is a better place when we no longer here, So I've always kind of been gifted that type of perspective, thanks to my family and thanks to those that are part of my foundation, and I'll just look to pass that on to the next ones.
Yeah, I think that what's so amazing about your story, like many, again, wasn't necessarily a traditional role, but there was somebody in your life that pushed you, somebody in your life that poured into you, somebody in your life that said, like, hey, this would be a good path for you. Um,
Right.
what I love
Yeah.
about your story, though, is like the folks in your life led by example, right? So your mom being an
Right.
educator, but again, like you saying, your dad being one of the best teachers you know. So folks leading by
And I
example.
hated school. Like, school was not my thing. You know what I'm saying? Like, if you ask my family now, even if you ask some of my friends now that have known me for a lifetime, like Cornell, like still teaching, like Cornell's doing his thing. And it's like almost surprising because I was not the academic guy. Like I spent most of my time playing football. That's why I added that to my bio, right? Like my real identity was centered in athletics for a long time. And that was also kind of one of the reasons why I decided that I wanted to, early on work with kids, was because I saw that same young man in so many other Black boys, right?
Yep.
Where their identity is centered in this athlete or in, the way that they can ball, but they don't understand that they can use that vehicle to be able to become an academic later.
Yes. And I think that your story, like so many of our brothers who are athletes, the mentorship that goes
Mhm.
into coaching and playing football and being part of a team, a lot of those skills are very transferable to the classroom.
Yeah.
And again, I don't think if you don't push young brothers to help see that and understand that, right, it's not a field that they're exposed to or that they'll go to.
Right.
Um,
Right.
a lot of times I shout out my husband on the show because he's a teacher, but he was an athletic guy too, right? Started out with football, right? And those skills are extremely transferable to the classroom. But I think it's funny that you're like, I hated school.
I hated school. It wasn't until I got to college and realized that I loved history. That's when I started to love school.
Well, college allows you the freedom sometimes to explore what you
Right.
want to explore and be what you want to be, and not in that whole confined construction of how
Right.
we run K through 12
And
education.
to hear the truth too. I think a lot of
Yes.
times, like there's so much indoctrination in the K through 12 space professors and people in higher education, right, are a little bit more, like you said, they have more lateral to be able to teach not only in different pedagogical styles, but with more inclusive content. And that's what really struck me about college history. It was like a mind explosion of new information.
Yes. And I mean, the dope thing about that is you teach African American studies right now.
Right.
So taking that and giving that to students at a younger age, so you don't have to
Mhm.
wait to college to kind of, you know, feed their appetites and give them knowledge and like break this system
Right.
of indoctrination that they have.
Right.
So I love that. I think that's dope. I like how that like comes full circle for you. Dope. So listen, what's up with the block? Can you tell us
Oh,
about brothers liberating our communities? What is going on
man,
with the block?
I just like standing up and looking out on the block. I just appreciate, being in the town, hanging with my homies on the stoop. You know how it is.
Yes.
We really just trying to build that type of community, right? Where, back in the day where we was hanging out on the stoop, we was hanging out on the steps. It's me and my bros, and we got each other's back, and we going through hard times and we going through struggles. But that's okay, right? Because through our collective action, we will liberate ourselves, right? And that's
Yes.
why I love this is the shirt I bought from y'all because brothers
Shout out.
liberating our communities. You know what I'm saying? It fit perfect. It fit perfect. The block is always looking to provide that type of environment. How can we watch each other's back, relax and chill, but also be moving towards liberation at the same time, right? And I think that it's so important to be able to do those things simultaneously, right? We live in a world that's riddled by these false dichotomies where you can't be liberatory and teach, or you can't be a Black man and be positive, right? Like, how can we be all these things, right? How can we be all these things? And how can Block provide this environment for the whole Black male educator, right? Whether it be watching football on Sundays, whether it be going to esports leagues, whether it be going to literary clubs and reading scholarly articles, whether it be having block parties and throwing events and social events, right? Like, how can we feed the Black men? I see Ronald on here. How can we feed these Black men so that they feel seen? At the end of the day, it's so many of these Black men out here in these buildings that are false uncles and fathers and brothers to these kids.
Yes.
And they go home with this weight on them every single day. And they don't even feel like nobody sees them or nobody recognizes the plight and the secondary trauma that they're taking on, right? And so Block is here to say, look, I got y'all. Like, we get it. Like, we've been there too. We there too. It's development for us, by us. It's events. Help build your network, help find your mentor, help get what you need so that you'll be back next year. We're not talking about 10 years. We just talking about next year. Let's just focus on next year. Let's just focus on tomorrow, right? Because we know as educators, it be like that sometimes. You walk out the building like, I ain't coming back tomorrow, all right?
I'm sick of this nonsense. I ain't doing this no more. Sick of these kids. Sick of these teachers. Yes.
Sick of these teachers.
Yeah.
And that's the real thing, right? Like, when we first got started, that's what we realized, right? There was development in the schools, right? You go to professional development once a quarter in your school, and it's like how to build relationships with kids, like how to communicate with families, right? And like, 80% of teachers, these white women, need to have those type of professional developments.
Exactly.
I need to have professional development on how to talk to your crazy white ass when you said something dumb to me, right? So that's where block development really first started. Our very first session ever was the Black tax, right? This idea that as Black educators, especially as Black men, the disciplinarian in a building, we taking on all the tasks. We're taking on all the roles.
Yes.
And it's so taxing, right? And how do we advocate for ourselves? How do we say no? How do we create boundaries and space to be able to maintain our own, right, sanity?
Yes.
Right? It's okay. Like, that was one of our very first messages. Like, it's okay to say no. Like, no, Susan, I will not do bus duty. Right?
Like, I won't. It won't.
No,
be me.
Megan, I will not come get Devontrez from your class.
You got to figure that out, sis. Yes. No, but you are dead on, because I think that even, again, amplifying that and bringing that to the forefront, that it's okay to say no. And just because you're the black man in the building doesn't mean you're the sole savior in the building. I think that that's an amazing concept, and allowing the space for
Right.
black men just to be black men,
Right.
to bring your whole self to a space. I was having a conversation a couple weeks ago. We had Chris Valentine on from Real Men Teach, and he
Oh,
was
Curtis,
talking
the man.
Curtis. Sorry, I was saying Chris. Curtis Valentine.
Oh, next week is Chris. Next week is Chris. We
Next
got the
week,
three
we're
seeds.
trying to get Chris. Chris, confirmed.
We
Yes,
got
but
the
next
three
week
seeds.
trying to get.
Oh.
Listen, y'all black men are out here doing it, okay? Out here doing it. But Curtis brought a really good point, and I think that you are building on top of that. Like, just as a black man, being able to bring who your full self is to a space is so important for your mental health and for your sustainability within the work. I shouldn't have to show up in a mask and show up one way
Right.
at work, right? I should be able to bring my full self. But the fact that the block is creating these spaces for black men to come in and be whoever they are.
Right.
And again, even what you said, Chris coming, right? That duality of like the ratchet. Like, why can't I be ratchet and teach? Right? Like, there are two sides to me. Like, I am a full person. But the fact that you guys are creating these spaces for people to be their whole selves is truly important. But on top of that, I don't think that people think of what black men need in the way that you are, in terms of like, hey, let's frame this conversation on how when Susan or whoever comes up to you, how do you create these boundaries to like push back so that it doesn't turn into her crying, you getting in trouble, you being seen as aggressive or mean, or off-putting, like any of those things. Because as the black man, you have the right to say no. And just because I have a skill that you haven't developed, right? Like, I can relate to kids, I can build relationships with kids. Right. That doesn't become my problem too, for the fact that you can't. So all of that, I think.
And to my administrator, no, I'm not going to lead professional development on what I do in my class for free. And I'm not going to be a dean. I'm not going to take your promotion to be a dean so I can walk the hallways and be an overseer for these kids in your school. Right. Yes. Like, that's what happens next. Right. That was another one of our conversations. Right. Like, how do we, even this year, we're having that conversation about how can we diversify and make education more lucrative for black men. Right. Yes. Like, far too long, this tax, we do stuff for free, or we get out of education because we don't want to move up into administration because our path is discipline laced, right? And so how can we start to use our skills and our talents, think outside the box, and provide ourselves and our families with multiple revenue streams that are still education based, right? But are not necessarily within a school building, or that are not necessarily underneath somebody else's purview or report, So
yeah, like earning the respect that y'all deserve.
Right.
Earning the respect that y'all deserve, because black men
respect and the dough.
Yes, black men aren't the face of instruction, right? So when people talk about schools, black men's expertise is extremely devalued when you talk about instruction. And it's a shame because they prioritize the strength that you have, the role as a protector, and being able to build a relationship with kids. That's value over the fact that, like, I am an academic professional too.
Right. Also, yeah. Also,
like I actually am the dual threat. Like,
right.
You know what I mean? But a lot of times, as I see it, I've seen it super devalued. So the fact that you are creating avenues for these brothers to say, like, come up from under that oppression, brother. Come and get this money. Come out here and show your skill. And the fact that you are, again, a living example of that, I think is amazing.
Working on it one day at a time, Shana.
No, you are. You definitely are. And a lot of times, right, I toss up to whether to read a person's whole bio, right? Like, so on, blah, 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 show. But I really stick to doing that because I think that people need to see the fullness and the work that people really out here putting in.
Yeah.
We salute our brothers for, a lot of things. And sometimes we salute things for our brothers for things like that's supposed to be happening or doing. But in this space, in the educational space, I don't feel like our brothers get lifted up enough and respected for the instructional work that y'all do. So shout out to Block for that being some of the goals out there that y'all are instituting and putting out there.
Thank you.
I think that's an amazing movement. The Block is definitely hot out here.
Yeah, the Block is hot. Shout out to Weezy.
Yes. Shout out to Weezy. Shout out to Erykah Badu too.
Look.
Got the Block on lock, so we doing it out here. Don't make me sing out here, Cornell. What's also interesting, have you ever had a black male teacher?
So no,
Hmm.
I had black men that were around me. So like I remember a black male educator in my elementary experience. He was in the building. Oh wait, let me stop lying because I recently have had this revelation. Okay, so like in my easily recalled memory, like maybe third, fourth grade type stuff, like no,
Mhm.
never had a black male educator. What I often forget is that my preschool director is a black man.
Okay.
And I would love to give that shout out to Mr. Bestie. Mr. Bestie
His
is
name, I love it.
Rev Bestie, right? He's still in the pulpit. He's still running the Paseo Baptist Learning Center down on 25th and Paseo. And he's been, the face of him and Miss Irma L. Williams, the late Irma L. Williams, who just passed away less than a month ago, were the founders of the daycare that I went to at a church called Paseo Baptist here in town. That was in the 70s, the center for the civil rights movement here in Kansas City,
Oh,
right? So the founder of the church was really big into civil rights activism. And like when the big wigs from the South come to Kansas City, they go to that church, right? And so they have a daycare there, and I'm talking, so many black children come through that daycare and become successful adults, and it's through the hands of Reverend Bestie. So the
shout out,
first,
Reverend Bestie.
yeah, the first,
Yeah, that's amazing. But
man.
besides Reverend Bestie, you didn't. I mean, the
Nah,
good
that was
thing
it,
about your experience is again you were surrounded by black men.
right,
Um, so I think that's dope. And because I
right,
feel like a lot of our kids, we all know, go through K through 12 education without one black teacher.
right. One,
So to
one.
see a male is a rarity.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And sometimes
And even like
go ahead.
I also put that in my bio, right? I went through like a very diverse like educational experience. So I went
Mm-hmm.
through here in town, Lincoln Prep was like open in 1860, right? Like as like one of the first black schools here
Mm-hmm.
in west of Mississippi. Um, Mostly all black school back in the day. Now it's kind of starting to shift, but thanks to gentrification. But even still, no black teachers over there, right? But I was with all a bunch of black kids. And then when
Yeah.
I went to Rockhurst High School, which is that private school, I had never been around so many white people at once. It
So
blew
the
me
culture
away.
shock.
It blew me away. And that was when I first started getting like where are my niggas at? Like I needed affinity spaces. I was 14. Did not know anything about sociology or affinity groups.
Mm,
It was 2004 at that point. So like the justice movement and kind of the work that we did around equity back in the early 2000s was really a lot of gender work.
mhm.
We came a long way in the 2000s around gender, and that's kind of we're seeing the effects of that today, gender and sexuality.
Yes.
But we didn't do a lot of anti-black, right? We didn't do a lot of anti-racist,
Anti-racist stuff. Yeah.
stuff back then,
Yeah.
and we had a club that was called the Multi-Ethnic Educational Team. It was at Rockhurst, it was the Black Club, right? It was,
Okay.
once a month, we'd all get together in a room during a plan period, and it'd be every black kid in the school, which was like 20 of us, you know what I'm saying? And
I was just
it
like, oh,
was so important to us to have that space, to be
I'm
able
sure.
to be able to, and that was kind of my first experiences too with like things like Amplify, like with this Teachers of Color conference. Like how is it that black folks wait till we get behind closed doors to like exhale sometimes? You know what I'm saying?
I mean, we all know because being sometimes yourself out in a world where you are the minority, the fears that come with that because of the
Right.
judgment, the oppression, or the ridicule that come with that.
Mm-hmm.
Which you made me just think a thought. Like, sadly, sometimes for our children, they're in schools and they're the majority, right? But
Yeah.
they're controlled by the minority, so they have to wait till they get home or outside to exhale and even be themselves.
Because don't bring that up in here. This is school.
Right.
Leave that at home.
Leave it at home. But this
Yeah.
again, this is where I spend 7-8 hours of my day, and you telling me to leave a framework or a thought that
Right.
I'm raised in culturally to leave it at home. But
Backwards.
yeah, It's super backwards, which is why the need for black male educators, black educators, period, is a
Right.
must
Right.
in this country. So our babies don't have to go through that. So what are some of the approaches that Block is taking to go through the recruitment and the retention of black male educators? What are some of the formal steps y'all doing?
Well, the recruitment pieces is a little bit more complicated because I think there are other organizations here in Kansas City. We have a really robust educator of color pipeline and an organizational ecosystem. So shout out to Dr. Trinity Davis. She runs an organization called Teachers Like Me.
Yes.
Who they recruit.
That's Sister Fire. I like her.
She the best. Y'all should bring her on as well.
Yes.
She recruits nationally, right, at HBCUs and schools of ed to Kansas City, and then they build affordable housing for Black educators.
Yep.
Which is a game changer, right? Because we know that that's one of the major costs that kind of hold back young educators from entering the profession.
Yep.
Block doesn't do that. Block isn't your traditional like recruiting organization. We focus mostly on pathway exposure. So like I said, I'm teaching the African American course, African American history. I'm also teaching a grow your own teacher course next semester, where juniors and seniors get dual credit with the local university and then get fast tracked through their Institute of Urban Education that they have at the University of Missouri, Kansas City. And so it's an established partnership that we have where kids get interested or introduced or exposed to what being a teacher can actually look like, right? Like, once again, through my K through 12 experience, if I didn't know my father and my mother to be educators, I wouldn't have thought that Black men could be teachers, right? Yep. It's the age-old idiom of if you don't see it, you can't be it.
Can't be it. That's right.
So as an educator now, I believe my best recruitment tool is talking to young Black men about what it means to be a teacher and just teaching them, right? Yep. And being like the realest teacher they have, where, you know, and having the best class that they have, right? Where they can say, you know what, like, you know, before this, I didn't think teaching was really for me, but you know, after hanging out with Mr. Ellis for a semester, I could see it. You know, it's a possibility, you know, and that's really in 10 years how we double the number of Black male educators in the space, right? Is by, of course, retaining and sustaining the guys that are in, but also by pushing 4 or 5 a year into schools of ed. You know, getting 10 to 12 more kids interested in teaching at earlier and earlier can help create this self-sustaining model of Black educators that never technically leave the city if they don't want to, right? They could come up through K through 12, be finished with college and a master's in 5 years, and then get a contract with Kansas City Public Schools and work for 5 years and become an administrator, right?
Like that's the goal, right? And that's perfect. The way that you like lay that pipeline out, that's the goal. You already know, like that's aligned with what the center's mission is and what we're trying to do. But I would love for districts to see that as a valuable goal, right? Like invest in your own, send them babies through and have them come back. We just was knowing that there's a teacher shortage. Yes. But the way to solve that problem is to invest in your own district, invest in your own kids. Your teachers are sitting right in front of you, right? Like if you don't invest in your own kids, where do you think these people going to drop from the sky? Where you going to get teachers from? Where? And what better than to grow your own, invest in the kids right there, right in front of you. Instead of like, I hope we get, you know, hundreds of applicants. They might come from out of state. No, people, I mean,
they don't exist actually.
Right. It's not even a pool of them out there.
Right.
The best way to do that is really to invest in your own and create a system where you can continue to cycle teachers in, again, who are from the neighborhood, who know the kids, who know the families, who are product of that environment. What better way to create safer schools? I mean, I am completely with you.
And better outcomes, right? Like we know what the data says about when you give kids culturally relevant teachers and pedagogy.
One Black teacher increases kids' chances of graduating by 39%, specifically for low-income Black boys. One Black teacher. That's all it takes. In 3rd through 5th grade. That's all it takes. And when I read the report, read that data, seen that research, I just couldn't understand why people weren't like dashing to places to
Right.
really grab up Black teachers, train Black teachers. But again, when I thought about it a little deeper, that's rooted in a whole nother concept,
Right.
right?
Well,
Like,
everybody is so reactionary too in their response, right? The response is like, let's go to schools of ed, right? Like, let's go to career changes and career fairs and try to recruit new teachers, right? The
mhm.
response is not like, let's rethink about how we're teaching kids right now. The response
Yes,
is not like our next generation of hope of teachers are the kids sitting in seats right now. We're
mhm.
out here trying to look for external solutions for problems that were created internally, right?
Yes,
We
yes.
have to look inside of us to figure out exactly what is going to be the solution for this problem that we've created.
So I crack up, right? So, in my work, we do it all. We do the recruitment, retention, good stuff, right? So when I'm talking to districts and I'm talking about investing and grow your own, they're like, yeah, that's great. But do you have any teachers right now? Do you have anybody that's coming on right now? I'm like,
Right,
I can give you some on the pad, but let's talk about how we don't have to keep having this conversation.
right,
We don't have to keep scrambling. Like, let's really
right,
talk about how to build out a program. One of our educator pathway programs, Liberation Academy. I'm like, let's talk about instituting this in your school. Let's talk about connecting teachers, teaching and social justice. Let's talk about how do we expose these young people to the career. They're like, nah, we good. Do you got
right.
it for
We don't
me?
want that.
Yo, come on, y'all. But again, like you said, very, very reactionary. And I know that you guys on the block also create like liberatory curriculum. I would
Yeah,
love to hear
yeah.
about that because I think that's dope. I think that's amazing, especially for Black men.
It has to be there, right? That's a part of the sustainment tools. Like Black people, Black teachers, especially Black male educators, in my case, don't want to teach stuff that they know is not true, right? I think that we mentioned that the other day. Like, if I know I'm giving this lesson, I'm reading out of this textbook a story that I've heard from my own family or that I've read in other books to know that it's not true or that there's more to the story, I'm not going to want to teach that. And then if I don't teach that, I'm going to be reprimanded or disciplined by my administrators because I'm not upholding this whitewashed truth, right? Like, that's not quite right. So, I mean, especially social studies and history curriculum are things that Block has created to supplement other schools and other curriculums that you all have to give kids a more inclusive and more overarching view of what these curriculums can really look like. Right now, the African American curriculum that I'm enacting is centered around slave revolts. And it goes through 10 of the biggest slave revolts in North American history. I actually have the book right here.
Yes, pull it out. Yes, we love when our guests give us resources.
It's called
Dope.
Rebels Against Slavery. I would say that the Lexile level is pretty low, right? So I would say that this is appropriate for middle school students, even, I would give this to my 6th to 8th grade students when I taught middle school. I'm giving it to my juniors and seniors now as just like a jumping off point. We're going to read these, narratives or short, chapters, and then we're going to use those to as foundations for our research, right? So after each revolt that we'll read about, they'll pick 5 or 6 things from the story that was in here that they know is an incomplete story, right? Like, there's more to this character, or there's more to this story, that this paragraph that was in here, and it'll be their job to kind of dig deeper to be able to find out more information and find out more, again, like the full story, because no story is full, right? There's 3 sides to every story. And so, as well and as accurate as this could be, we still have to go and find other sources, right? And so as historians, it's my job to kind of teach them this process of not just like the information, but also like how to research, how to write, how to find verifiable sources, all these skills that, we see kids lacking. It's amazing. These kids can log into my PlayStation and hack into my Amazon account and Snapchat, but they can't like write in MLA format and like research and cite and create footnotes in a bibliography, right? Like, these 2 skills, like, y'all so damn computer literate, like, let's get more like critically literate, right? And so that's a part of the work that we'll be diving into this year. And it's so, I think it's revolutionary and liberatory because, again, it flips the script on what African American history looks like. Oftentimes we are taught African American history in the black people triad, right? Harriet Tubman on one corner, Martin Luther King on the other corner, and then Obama on the other corner. And we have this like holy trinity of black people that are taught in like eras of the black experience in America. We're not even going to get into this book. We've been teaching for 2 weeks, and I haven't even started this book yet because we did. They had some. Okay, so here's how the class actually started. The very first day we did a KWL chart. So my teachers out there know, right? Like a knowledge, like what you know chart, what you want to know chart, and then what you learn chart, right?
Yep.
And so the very first day I just spent trying to figure out what they knew about African American history, right? What they've been told in the past, what stories they know, and like what questions they have, right? And so I discovered from that they really had a lot of gaps around ancient world history, which is my specialization. And so we started with like some other conversations about like Mesopotamia or the origins of humanity, like an overall human existence timeline, right? And then this week, we're focusing on like all those ancient African kingdoms, right? So Aksum, Mali, Songhai, like some of these. A lot of African American history courses start that way, right? Where they go to the African kingdoms before the African American slavery, right? To give kids a foundation and to get kids understand that, like, no, your experience didn't start here with the slavery experience, right? Like, no, also slavery doesn't start here either. Chattel slavery and race-based slavery starts here in America, right? But like, these are concepts that existed long before white people even existed, guys. Like, we have to understand this as a context for this, right? And so now we can talk about slavery, which is a bulk of your existence, right? Or a bulk of, your understanding of African American history. But we're going to, again, look at it through an agency lens and a critical agent, like a revolutionary lens. So this myth has mostly been overturned in the historical world, but like, this benevolent paternalism idea of like how some slaves like being slaves and they was content with their masters and like they were indentured servants and it wasn't that bad, right? Like that type of narrative, right, is countered with, this agency story, right? Like I had so many seventh graders ask me like, how come slaves didn't fight back? And like, you know what, they did. And you're intentionally not told about that, right?
Yes.
So
just like you're intentionally not told about your civilization prior to coming to America. Like all of that is extremely intentional.
Exactly.
Well, your pushing of this, again, what is amazing and to connect definitely with the Block is teaching what should be taught. So as a Black man who has his degree in ancient world history, if you showed up with a curriculum that started at slavery, you probably be like, oh, so I'm supposed to teach this?
I'm not teaching this. Like, I'm not.
For this district?
Like on my interview, right? Like hopefully on my interview, I'm an experienced enough educator where I'm like, can I see the curriculum that you're going to be asking me to teach? Which is a whole nother step, right? Some of these Black men can't even get. Let me rephrase that. Some of these Black men have been so underserved in their educational and professional experience and development that they need to be coached into advocating for themselves in an interview. So they're not even like, oh, thank you for this job opportunity. I'll teach and do whatever you want me to do. Okay. Right. So let's assume that they've made it past that point. And I get to the place where I'm actually like asking for a curriculum. Like, what do you expect me to teach? Like, hopefully they're at a place where they can walk out if that's the type of curriculum that's being handed to them, right? Where it's not even like a question of like, oh, well, what's my flexibility with this? Or what's my latitude? And how much can I like bend this so that I get later on letters from parents and administrators about how I'm teaching crazy stuff in my classroom, right? Like, hopefully I can just walk out of there and walk into another interview and say like, I have partners that use this curriculum, right? And they can show this curriculum to their prospective Black educators. Say, here's what you're going to be teaching. Here's a curriculum that we picked up from one of our third-party partners. They come in and work, and we also do instructional coaching and executive coaching inside of buildings, right? To help make school environments more sustainable for Black men and for all Black teachers, right? But or teachers of color. But like this curriculum piece is huge, not only for attracting Black educators to your school building, but also for like the retention of them and their sustainment on their day-to-day grind. Like we talked about the emotional toll. The emotional toll is only compounded when they're teaching, right, things they don't agree with or things that they find to be contentious.
But that's why it's so important, right? Because you think about all the struggles facing teachers, period, right? Just in the profession. And then you narrow it down to like, okay, then I'm Black in the profession. And there's so many other things that like that I have to like defend that are coming at me as a Black person. And then the one thing like you get into teaching, right? Like I want to teach curriculum, like I want to teach children. Right. And then I get something handed to me that is like contentious with my soul and my spirit. Now I gotta fight about this too. Like all of that is insane. So to be able to create curriculum that, like you said, people want to teach, right? And I've heard that before. People are like, I don't want to teach this nonsense. Like, so they either try to find another school, create their own stuff, or get out of the profession. So to again amplify another issue, like, yo, folks, districts, y'all gotta have curriculum in here that Black men actually want to teach, that are going to sustain them, that they have joy, right? I have joy in making my lesson plans. I'm excited, right? One of the main things about teaching is internalize your lesson, right? You in there living it out like it's a part of you.
Yeah.
If it's a lie, I'm out here living out this lie. Like I'm not doing that.
I won't. My spirit won't let me.
I'm not doing that. I'm not.
Won't allow me. So, and I think even beyond that, right, is the pedagogy, right? Like, and that's why Block also works with the instructional coaching rubric that we created that focuses more on identity and self, right? Like so many times. So here's the issue. Here's the problem, right? Like Black teachers leave teaching because they're doing what they know to be like strong tactics for building relationships with kids. Like they know like the Black teacher magic that exists inside of classrooms, right? Like that is something that exists because Black teachers and other teachers that know themselves and know their manifestation of their self in a racially context society, right? Like when you're able to bring that true and full self into classes, kids pick up on it, kids feel it. You're able to break down barriers much faster, to build trust, to build like this learning environment, right? I will argue that like when that classroom is happening and like that Black teacher magic is happening, it's not codified well. Like if you look at the Danielson Group's instructional rubric, right, and you go to a classroom or you're checking off what a teacher is doing, right? It's like learning target written on the board. Are 80% of kids like raising their hands and showing engagement? Right? Like is teacher like using inquisitive questions to push student understanding, right? Like very surface level, like behavior and skills things for teachers. None of them really dive into whether or not the teacher is entering the classroom with prejudice or bias, which may be leading them to some of these negative behaviors and skills for teachers, right? And so this instructional coaching rubric that we created and that I'm piloting right now, first of all, like helps to codify a Black teacher magic, right? So when you walk inside of a school and you ask like, where's the best teacher in the building? Not only is it the best teacher on paper, but it's also the best teacher as you walk by the class. You know, when you walk by a classroom, you'd be like, ooh, what's going on in there, right? That's never the classroom that principals walk you to, right? That's never the classroom that instructional or that they bring tours through, right? They never take you to that classroom. They take you to the classroom where the teacher that's got all the check marks, right? Take you to the classroom that scores the highest on the instructional rubric, right? And unfortunately, right, those two things don't match, right? Because a teacher that's always doing what's best on the rubric is not always doing what's best for kids, right? So how can we make the rubric and what's best for kids match? And how can we bring up these teachers that are entering classrooms with prejudice, bias, not truly understanding sense of self and understanding like where you are, what your privilege brings to the table, what your oppression brings to the table, and how to use that in your classroom space. And then let that feed into your behavior and skills, right?
I think that's a dope point.
No,
that's amazing the way you laid it out. especially the point about like, does this teacher have bias, right? Like,
Right.
none of that will be taken into account on rubrics. Like, people ain't checking for that.
Right. But they are checking for whether or not they're using strong questioning, right? But like, how strong is your questioning going to be if you already don't believe the student can
That children
accomplish
can
the
achieve.
task?
Exactly. Or are you following some framework or some rubric created by the district? As long as you're checking off those boxes,
Right.
then everything is all good. But at the end of the day, if you don't believe that those children sitting in front of you can achieve, then they won't. And I don't think that there are enough rubrics that actually measure that a teacher's actual belief in students.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And and that's tough to measure, right? Like, we're at this place in the pilot right now where we're trying to combine observations with like self-reflection to be able to take that data and kind of dig out where perception gaps are, where like teacher gaps are. And that's highly theoretical work, right? Like, it's very malleable, right? Like, and we're in a place now where we're kind of trying to figure out, like, how can I actually, like, what can I observe in a teacher's behavior and practice that give me keys towards their prejudice and bias?
Yes. Oh, I'm completely with you, and I definitely want to make this point too. Like, just because teachers have skills and know-hows don't mean they want to. And I think that people need to be very clear on when we're talking about racism and bias and what that means in the classroom. And teachers can have skills to do things, but if they don't like children, they won't. And that is pervasive.
And what we'll see is that, like, they have a disparity of what tools, or like, we know as teachers, you have a toolbox, right? Like, you have several things that you can do to get a student to where they need to be. Like, I think one of the earliest tools that I've used, or observations that I've used, is like, which scaffolds are you using for which students? Like, how persistent are you with certain students and with others? And like, how, like, what students do you cater to, almost, right? Like, and I think oftentimes teachers always are catering to students, right? We just have to be like metacognitive about which students they are and for what reasons, right?
And I love when teachers reflect like that, right? I've seen people reflect on that and reflect out loud, right? Like, I've seen folks, Dr. Bristol came on a couple months ago and he was talking about how he discovered he had an issue with Black girls, right? Like, he didn't see, he's like, but I realized it through my practice. Like, so, and you would say possibly in his class, he was catering to the boys, but he had a reflection on like, what was my issue? Like, why am I having this issue? So I love when I see people actually reflect on those practices out loud and name them for themselves. Like, I see I got a favor here. I'm calling this person so much because, or I ignored this person because, or when this behavior happens, I don't address. Or in reading out loud, I choose this person because, or in my line of question, I want my lesson to flow. So instead of pushing, Tony, I go ahead and push
and move on.
Yep. Because I need to get my flow on. I love to see when those reflections and those things are happening out loud. I mean, to me, sometimes that's just the essence of like teacher growth.
It is.
I love
it's
when
an art, right?
Yes.
It's an art.
And it excites me when those things happen, right? Because you're pushing yourself to be better in your practice, to be better at your pedagogy, to be better at how you're commanding your classroom. But to get rubrics to push teachers more towards that and thinking about themselves and how they conduct their classroom instead of student blaming and saying what students can't do.
And parent blaming.
Oh, yes. I think that is amazing. But I think people will feel a lot more fulfilled in doing that. I think that people feel like when you take the student blaming or the parent blaming out of the picture, that creates more stress for teachers. I don't. I think it'll create more growth and success for teachers, because teachers aren't feeling success right now with student blaming and parent blaming. Are you still feeling bogged down in a way? But I would love to ask you this question because I know you will have a dynamic answer for it. Especially all the stuff that you're doing in the education space. What do you think are some of the barriers to obtaining educational justice?
First, we got to define justice. I think it's different for each person. So that's, of course, if you don't have common language, then you can't do anything.
Facts.
So that's, of course, probably the biggest barrier, especially for America as a whole. My definition of justice, would be like economic mobility,
Mm-hmm.
which is weird, right? That I say like my vision of educational justice is economic mobility, right? Because like the purpose to me of education is to give kids the tools to unlock a successful life, right? And
Mm-hmm.
a life that's at least comfortable, right? And that comes with making some money, right?
Yes.
And it's not as surface level as like go to school to get a job, right? It's like go to school to create a job, right?
Yes.
Like go to school to figure out what you love to do and what your affinity is, find the gap, be critical about the gaps in the world, and then step into them, right? Like that's what critical education is for. That's what critical education justice is to me, that all kids, no matter where they come from, have the opportunity to achieve their economic mobility through education. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and like, when it like initiatives wise, um, that would look like increasing graduation rates.
Mm-hmm.
That would look like increasing higher learning or I'm sorry, that would increase post-secondary enrollment rates and diversifying the enrollment of post-secondary education, whether that be career tech or college or whatever. And I think that looks like increasing teacher salary to six figures. Let's just put it there.
Hey, listen, you ain't got to be shy about throwing that out there. You don't have to be shy about throwing that out there. I talk a lot about, especially when I exposing kids to the field, like dispelling the myth that teachers don't get paid.
Right.
When you can't make, it's not a living wage, and it is. But
It is.
that's not to say that teachers are not severely or sorely underpaid. Like they are for what they do and what they perform for one of the most important jobs right here in America. Teachers are definitely severely underpaid. But
yeah, it's not about the pay. Really, it's the principle of the culture, right?
yes,
Like the pay is just reflective of how you see me.
yes, the value, my value,
Right.
what you see my value as,
Right.
in this society, in this community. But we'll
Right.
get into a whole nother conversation about capitalism and what is value.
Look, and we only got 8 minutes left.
Right, which is why teachers are severely underpaid. But I also want to give you the opportunity, as we always do. We have a segment on here called "Thank a Black Teacher." So I wanted you to give the opportunity to go ahead and thank a Black teacher out here. Let's do it.
We already. We're gonna move it along a little bit to the women in my life, my mother and my sister, to Deborah Ellis and Arent Ellis. Deborah has been an educator for over 30 years in the Kansas City Public Schools in physical education and health. I remember when I was a young child, I remember saying, my mama doesn't teach, she just teaches gym. And she jumped on my ass to let me know how important physical education was, how important health was, and how derogatory that statement was for physical education teachers. And so that was one of, my first and most impactful, powerful examples of what an educator was, being an educator's kid. My mother went through breast cancer and beat it. And I'll never forget, she was wearing a wig at the time because she had lost her hair. And she was in gym class, and one of the students had, maybe it was on accident or on purpose, I don't remember, you know how kids are, but hit her in the head with a ball, and her wig had came off. And it was, being an educator's kid, it was a very poignant moment where I saw the stress and I saw the emotions of my mother, not only going through her own life, but also dealing with 150 kids on a daily basis and what those kids brought to the table. If it wasn't for her selfless example, I wouldn't be the educator that I am today. So thank you for everything that you do. And then, of course, my sister, who is an art educator for the last 10 years and now a yoga educator. These two Black women in my life are the foundation and the bedrock for Block and for liberating our communities. So thanks, ladies. I love you.
That was dope. And shout out to your mom. So my husband too is a physical education teacher, and he says it's super disrespectful
Hella disrespectful
to say his gym. He hates that. Like, so no, I don't teach gym. It's physical education.
Right, it's physical education.
Yes, but shout out to your mom and shout out to your sisters out there for being your base and your rock. So thank you. And of course, as always, our people out there watching, please thank a Black teacher. Hashtag thank a Black teacher. Say the name of your folks in the comments. Share, please tag them. Thank a Black teacher. Again, let's give these folks their flowers and their roses while they are here.
While they're here.
Shout out to them. So, Cornell, you have a lot of influence. You dope. You got a lot of swag out there. So we appreciate you. But just as a Black male out here, what would you say to inspire our young people to get into the field?
Think about the shade you leave behind. There are young people out here. Every single young person will tell you that the world is not fair and something needs to be fixed. Hardly any of them will tell you that teaching is the way to fix it. Guys, education is a way to change the world that not only that you live in, but in the world that your ancestors and the people that come after you will live in. And I know that some of you out there are thinking about the world being bigger than just you. Let's think about teaching too.
That's dope. Our young people out here, that get down, Brother Cornell, okay?
Come holla at me, man.
Yes, and also, just besides the young people, as we wrap up, I just want to give you the floor to say anything to our folks out there watching today. Any words that you got to say to our folks watching?
Keep pushing, keep liberating. It's a lifelong battle. It can be tiring, but find some time for you. I play golf on Sundays. Find some time.
Yes, self-care. I think we truly underestimate the power of self-care.
Because we'll work ourselves to death. It's a gift and a curse, right? We'll work ourselves to death, and we have to. If we not living, we not working, right? So what's dying gonna do, right? Dying, you know.
Yeah, I mean, but the way you say that, you're not living, we're not working. What is dying going to do? That's something to definitely to be pondering on. But yeah, we underestimate the power of self-care. Like we said, it's a lifelong struggle, but how you going to sustain the struggle if you don't sustain yourself?
Exactly.
That's super important. But Cornell, I want to thank you for coming on our show today. We so appreciate you. But before I go, I got two messages. So for one, I want to send a shout out to my mom, Miss Vera Terrell. I don't know if she's watching today, but y'all, today is her birthday. Oh, happy birthday to my mommy, y'all. So today her birthday. She probably out to brunch with her sister, my auntie and her girlfriend. So, but
of course, you know how the aunties do.
Yes. Come on, girl. Let me take you a little breakfast. But yes, shout out to my mom today, celebrating her birthday. I love you, mommy. So shout out to my mom. I had to give her that. And I want to let everybody know, be ready for next week, okay? The center will be launching our national campaign, We Need Black Teachers. So next week, I'll be asking you all to jump in and support our campaign. I'll have a bunch of information for you next week, how to keep this carried on through social media with us. This campaign was actually given a lot of input by our high school students, because we are targeting our high school students and our early age kind of freshmen and sophomore college students as well. But we had a group of high school students who really worked on this campaign, came up with the slogan, helped us pick the logo, all that stuff. They had tons of input. So please get ready for next week to help us and support us to launch the We Need Black Teachers campaign. And shout out to all our junior servant leaders who helped us work on this campaign. So we need Black Teachers campaign coming to you for our launch next Thursday, September 9th. So please be here to watch us and support us next Thursday at 12. And Cornell, the block is hot. Shout out to you for coming aboard, brother. We love you. We appreciate you. See you guys
Thank you.
next
Love
week.
y'all too.